Hello again everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're making our way closer to the end of the 1-bar solo builds series, and today we're going to be going over a Necromancer setup using a two-hander. This setup works best in solo content like world bosses, questing, public dungeons, arenas, and soloing some of the 4-man dungeons, so keep that in mind as always. We're going to want to use a stamina based race as usual, and I'm on an orc at the moment. We want to place all of our attribute points into stamina, and then for a Munda Stone we'll want to use the Thief, but as usual the Lover would work here as well if you want more penetration. For our consumables we can just use Tri-Potions and then Artaeum Takeaway Broth as a food, or maybe Dubious Camorran Throne or Bewitched Sugar Skulls as cheaper options depending on the sweat level of the content you're running. Our two gear sets are going back to the usual for this type of build, so Sergeant's Mail and Order's Wrath with an Oakensoul ring and a Stamcro helmet. Sergeant's Mail gives us some health and health recovery, some extra damage, and a buff to our heavy attacks, which we'll be spamming with this setup. If you don't already have a set on hand, you can loot these in the Wayrest Sewers 1 and 2 dungeons, and on the other hand, Order's Wrath, the craftable set from the High Isle zone, gives us a ton of added critical chance, some bonus critical damage, and some weapon damage. We're going to want to wear Sergeant's Mail on our chest, a ring and a necklace, and then a two-hander like a maul for more penetration. You can always use a great sword or a battle axe if you'd like to, depending on your goals with your setup, but a maul is always a good basic choice here. For Order's Wrath, we're going to want to craft medium pieces and wear them on our shoulders, our hands, our pants, our belt, and our feet. All of our armor pieces, including the light Stamcro helmet, can be divines with max stamina glyphs, and then the jewelry can all be bloodthirsty with weapon damage glyphs. And now time for the weekly reminder, and that is if your gear pieces aren't all upgraded to gold, you can still absolutely play the game and finish most of the content, so don't think that you need to wait or anything like that. You'll certainly notice slightly better results when you do get everything maxed out, but for the meantime, if you're broke, you can always have some blue and purple pieces and it's really not that big of a deal. Alright, moving over to our champion abilities, we're going to use whatever we want in green as usual. I like mount speed and food, so I like to go with War Mount, Gifted Rider, Steed's Blessing, and Rationer on this character. Over in the blue section, we're going to want to slot Master at Arms, Reaving Blows, Fighting Finesse, and Deadly Aim. And then finally in the red section, we're going to want to slot Boundless Vitality, Bastion, Strategic Reserve, and Bloody Renewal. For passive abilities, we will want to grab everything from Gravelord and Living Death, while only worrying about getting Last Gasp from the Bone Tyrant skill line. Be sure to get all of the two-handed skill line passives, everything from light, medium, and heavy armor. You'll want to get both of the Undaunted passives, anything from the other guilds that you may like to use. Be sure to get those racial passives, and then of course anything from the craft section that you like to use. Our skill bar is first going to include Detonating Siphon as a nice damage over time ability that we can cast on corpses. Passively, it acts as a damage steroid, giving us an additional 3% damage while slotted. Next up, we're going to be using Stalking Blast Bones in place of the normal mobility skill. This is a nice burst of damage that also supplies us with a fresh corpse to use our siphon on. If you don't like Blast Bones for any reason, Stampede would be a nice skill to slot here in place of it as a nice mobility tool. Next up is Carve. This is our stackable bleed attack that we can hit multiple enemies with and also proc a damage shield on a successful hit. We want to be sure to keep that damage shield up all the time so we can just apply one more stack of this skill when we run out of shielding. And next up is Unnerving Boneyard for a source of major breach. This is a magicka based skill, so if you find that you would prefer to use a stamina based one, Razor Caltrops would work here in just the same way, with the added bonus of having a slightly larger radius. Boneyard is however a bit stronger, especially if we cast it on a corpse, so keep that in mind when picking which skill you'd like to use, while also being sure that you balance the amount of magicka and stamina skills that you have on your bar. Oftentimes just changing one skill from magicka to stamina based can provide you with enough sustain to kind of feel like your character is actually working properly, but for the most part having 3 magicka abilities, a spammable stamina ability, along with a free cast from Siphon seems to have good enough sustain for bigger fights. And then our 5th skill is going to be Spirit Guardian. This will passively heal us every 2 seconds while also acting as a sort of damage shield. soaking up 10% of any damage that we take while it's active. It also produces a corpse for us to use Siphon or Unnerving Boneyard on. And then our ultimate is going to be the Stinky Reddit user, or Pestilent Colossus. He smashes his hands into the ground, complaining about Oakensoul being too powerful until the devs nerf Empower, and he hasn't seen the light of day in at least 4 years. If we cast him early in a fight, he applies major vulnerability to our enemies too, so on top of doing a bunch of damage, he has a powerful debuff effect as well. Alright, so for our rotation, we're going to mainly want to put up our Spirit Guardian as a pre-buff, and then cast Blast Bones from a distance. And then once he explodes, we'll want to use Boneyard on his corpse. If there's a fresh enemy corpse on the ground, casting Siphon would be a wise move, otherwise another Blast Bones wouldn't hurt to procure another corpse for your Siphon. Be sure to run up and carve 3 times for maximum stacks of bleed and a damage shield, and just rinse and repeat, keeping everything active as it runs down, with heavy attacks in between things to keep your stamina up. Being sure that your damage shield is up as often as you can remember to use Carve to keep that active. Here's a couple random world bosses getting their asses kicked so you can see what the build looks like out in the world. As usual with this sort of setup, we aren't super massive damage dealers, but we can survive most difficult content on our own. Thanks for watching as always. Be sure to like the video and sub to the channel if you enjoyed. See you next time.
Rise, defeat my foes. Charge!
I need aid!